Good morning. I'm pleased to welcome you to another webinar in our What Matters Now in Higher Education series. My name is Josh Gawal. I'm your host, and F. Paul Greene will be the speaker today. Our objective with this series is to provide you and your peers with timely, practical, and concise advice, along with actionable insights to mitigate risk and drive effective strategies. In today's webinar, Paul will explore the main areas of risk and reward for AI adoption on campus, addressing multiple perspectives, including students, administration, and compliance. Before I pass it over to Paul, a few housekeeping items. First, this webinar is intended for general information purposes and should not be considered legal advice. All participants' lines are placed on mute. To submit questions, technical or content related, please send a message via the Q&A widget on your toolbar. We ask that you do not use the raise hand feature. Please feel to submit questions at any time. We'll address them as they come in and/or during a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. At the close of the webinar, you'll be prompted to complete a survey about today's event. It should not take you more than a couple of minutes, and we greatly appreciate the feedback. And with that, Paul, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks very much, Josh, and welcome everyone. Very happy to be here today. Happy to talk about this subject. Got a lot to get through, so I wanted to jump right in. First of all, let's talk about scope of our discussion today. Got a wide range of participants. Some of the folks I know, some I don't. I do see a CIO or two, so some folks with very in-depth and detailed involvement in AI on campus. We've got some administrators, we have some campus lawyers, so really a wide range of participants, and I'll try and model my comments to be relevant to everyone. But let's kind of jump right in and talk about risk and reward. And if we're going to talk about those things, they really boil down to one thing for me, and that's governance. You can't think about how to manage risk. You can't think about how to garner reward from AI adoption on campus without figuring out how to build a governance structure that lets you steer that boat, lets you kind of guide your efforts in that regard. And that'll be our main focus for the discussion today. So moving right along, let's see if I can get this to go. There we go. All right, so first of all, is there a problem? I think so. And what is the problem? AI is a tool. It's a highly sophisticated technological tool, and tools in the first instance create risk. If you've ever used a knife, there's a sharp end and there's a dull end. And the important thing is to know which end to use for what purpose. I want to take us back to middle of the summer last year, July 19th, a lovely Friday afternoon. It happened in the morning. Beautiful day. I was working from home, and all of a sudden I got this lovely blue screen of death on my computer. That's not my computer. That's the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. And for those of you who work in organizations that use the CrowdStrike tool, it's a cybersecurity tool meant to protect our systems. The CrowdStrike tool caused one of the most widespread outages ever recorded in kind of modern history, and had effects across the board, from airlines to law firms to schools and colleges and universities. And the lesson that we all learned from that is, hey, these tools that we use to help us in the first instance, to make our systems more secure, to alleviate the problems that we have with getting the right people in the right places to do the hard work that we're doing. Those tools create risk. I'll tell you, very few organizations had CrowdStrike on their risk register before July 19th of last year, but it did cause a widespread outage and a cybersecurity outage. It affected availability of systems, and that falls squarely in the realm of cybersecurity. So all of our organizations have robust governance structures, hopefully, in relation to protection of our systems and data. And the CrowdStrike outage just goes to show that there will always be a blind spot in relation to our governance. And the blind spot usually comes from misunderstanding how our tools work, the interdependency that these highly complex tools have, and the effects that, for example, an outage or a malfunction or a failure or a mistake can create. So that's the problem. Let's talk a little bit more about this tool that we're discussing today, AI, and what it means to us. And that's really key. I'm going to be talking a lot about the AI human interaction, what it means to use AI as a human user, and how that fits into our governance approach. So this idea that machines can mimic and replace humans, certainly nothing new. I grew up in the 80s, so of course I'm going to reference a Matthew Broderick movie, War Games, Joshua, right? The computer system that Dr. Stephen Falcon created to do what? In the first instance, replace his dead son. The storyline was that Dr. Falcon lost his son at a young age, and in his loneliness and throwing himself into his work, he started creating an AI system named after his son. And he taught that AI system by playing games. It was built in the first instance as something that Dr. Falcon could interact with. And as we kind of watch the movie, for those of you who are familiar with it, we anthropomorphize this tool that's meant, here in the movie to kind of run NORAD and protect us from nuclear war. And in the end, the AI tool becomes kind of the hero of the movie. It shows wisdom that the human users don't have. It shows a humanity that the humans don't have. It comes to the conclusion that the only way to win at nuclear war is to not play the game. That's the famous quote from War Games. And it's that interaction, it's that impulse that we have to anthropomorphize these tools, to think of them as human, as feeling, as thinking. That's something we need to be aware of, certainly, as we build our governance structures. So this idea of a machine that's intelligent, and maybe even human, is also quite old. Apologies in advance. There are a number of AI-generated images in this presentation. As a lawyer, I love AI image generation. It lets me create images without copyright concerns. And so what we have here is our friend Sigmund Freud using a laptop, which of course he never used. I bring Freud into the conversation because in 1919 he wrote an essay on what he called the uncanny, that feeling of when something familiar becomes a little bit strange, when it becomes all too familiar, that our attraction and affinity for that thing turns into revulsion. And the focus of his essay was on a living machine, an automaton that kind of represented and replaced a young woman in a story. So this feeling of attraction and revulsion is also a dynamic we have to keep in mind. You may be aware of the term of the uncanny valley. Masahiro Mori, a Japanese roboticist from 1970, came up with this curve that he graphed of, the more something becomes human-like, the more we love it until it gets a little too close for comfort, and then it's almost immediate revulsion and repulsion. I'd posit we're kind of at the top of that curve currently. There's all the hype around AI, and that's something that's difficult for us to navigate as counselors and subject matter experts at our organization. But there's also the immediate revulsion when we see the weird and strange things that AI does, when we see the AI slop in the internet. That's that kind of whipsaw effect of the uncanny in relation to AI. So we've got to balance these two things. We've got to balance our tendency to anthropomorphize these systems and also this kind of love-hate relationship that we have with these systems. For me personally, for anyone who's used a large language model that now has speech functionality, the cringy, sycophantic voice of Copilot drives me crazy. It's really good. It sounds really human, but gosh, it's cloyingly deferential and really, really creepy. That's how I kind of experience the uncanny every day in relation to these systems. So that's the problem in the first instance. Let's talk about what's causing the problem. We're going to talk a little bit about terminology here and what is AI generally. So AI can quite often be in the eye of the beholder, a broad field. I'm going to talk about some of the main areas of AI that we're going to interact with our organizations and institutions. Machine learning, nothing new. We've been teaching machines, and teaching again is an anthropomorphized term. We've been training machines how to get to results that we want on large data sets for decades. Much of our modern world could not function without machine learning. If we didn't have machine learning, you'd see my messy office behind me right now. Machine learning, as we'll talk about in a moment, works generally on pre-tagged and pre-labeled data. human beings have gone through and labeled data to say, this is a face and that's a background. And through machine learning, the code for Zoom is able to figure out where my face ends, where my head ends, and where my background begins. Usually pretty good, mostly because I don't have hair. Of course, with people wearing glasses or hair or hats, in those kind of more edge situations, the machine learning doesn't work as well as for someone with more clear definitions like me. Anyway, that's machine learning in the first instance. Deep learning is when we throw unlabeled, untagged data at systems and design them to learn on their own, to figure out what a face is and what a background is on their own. And we'll talk a little bit about that structure. And then we've got this weird little thing that's really captured our attention for the last few years, generative AI. And I've got it off to the edge there because, again, of the human element of our tendency to anthropomorphize these systems, treat them like human beings, think that they're smart in the first instance, and perhaps trust them more than we would something that we know is clearly a machine. Gen AI is supposed to be that. It's supposed to simulate human interaction, certainly when you're dealing with a large language model and language output, and put us at ease, make us feel like we're working with a human thinking, feeling being on the other side. And that can be troublesome. So on a little bit more in the terminology, I've talked about this a little bit, but we've got this idea of improving from experience, seeing different data sets and coming up with better results each time. We've got structured data sets, pre-labeled data sets, as I mentioned, with machine learning, and we've got a couple examples of use cases there. We've got a few examples of deep learning as well. Deep Blue, the chess-playing robot that, of course, bested the best human players in the world. Autonomous vehicles, transformers, and I don't mean the robots on TV. I mean the T in GPT is transformer. Pardon me, transformer. GPT stands for generative pre-trained transformer. So generative AI platforms are built in the first instance on deep learning neural networks. And again, they work on unstructured data, and they need lots and lots of data to be trained. And we'll talk a little bit about how that happens in the first instance. So deep learning is based upon what are called neural networks. Fancy term. It's supposed to simulate or emulate at least how neurons work in the human brain. It's built of multiple layers. You have an input layer, that's where the data goes in, or the prompt in the first instance. You have an output layer, that's where the output occurs. And at least one, what's called a hidden layer in between. Often there are thousands or tens of thousands or more hidden layers in between. And at each layer, an element of computation occurs to get from the right input to the right output. Let's go with a facial recognition example. Again, this is unstructured data, untagged data that goes into a neural network. If we're trying to ask it to recognize a face, it goes through at each level, at each layer, to try and get better each time at getting closer to the output of recognizing a face. Each of those layers made up of multiple nodes. Each of those nodes think of it as an individual computer that does a calculation on that data to figure out, is this a face or not? They're going to put it down the pathway of, yes, that's more likely a face, or no, that's less likely a face. And it happens at each node level, between each node and on each layer. The movement happens between layers through weights. Computations are applied to make it more likely for a result to go to yes or no or whatever the result is. And those weights can be tweaked or trained or tuned to affect the ultimate result. And then this network learns or is trained how to apply the ultimate weights. Networks, those weights can be tuned, but the system itself can tune and update the weights to go from layer to layer. And then you've got this idea of a neuron, and neurons are this connection of weight to node to output that go from beginning ultimately to end through each layer. Now that may have been very confusing, especially because I'm not a technologist, but to keep it easy, I watched a lot of Price is Right going up in the 1980s, and I love the game Plinko, right? And this is how I think of neural networks. And let's see if I can do some technology here. I'll turn on the laser pointer. Okay, so you've got the input layer at the top, the output layer at the bottom. Each dot is a node, and that's the data flowing through the system. And the weights are applied to move it from node to node to make it more likely to move from node to node to get to the output layer, and the ultimate output that you want. Say image recognition, that's a face, or that's not a face. And there are lots of ways to get to that same result. And the machine itself, the system itself, determines how to get there. And there's a little bit of chaos built in. We don't really know why or how, maybe how, but not exactly why it applies weights in certain proportions. But the most important thing in these systems is they get to the right output and then they can get there efficiently. Now, this idea of applying weights to make the kind of little ball of data dance around to get to the right output is a very interesting one. And they found that they can tweak weights to get unexpected outcomes. You may have read about the LLM Claude where researchers found the right weight to accentuate answers relating to the Golden Gate Bridge. They found that there was a certain propensity of Claude to reference the Golden Gate Bridge in its answers. So it found where that researchers found where that weight application was, tweaked that weight to accentuate that output, and Claude would still give you correct outputs, but it would be obsessed about the Golden Gate Bridge. You could ask it, I've got $10 in my pocket. How should I spend it? And it would tell you the best way to spend that is to pay the toll to pass the Golden Gate Bridge so you can have a view of a lifetime from the middle of the bridge. Or if you asked it for a restaurant a recommendation, it would say, drive across the bridge to Sausalito, and there's a great little fish restaurant where you can gaze upon the Golden Gate Bridge. So that kind of chaos, that kind of unexpected outcome is part of the process. This is not, we talked about learning. This is not learning. This is random computation with applied weights, with certain rules applied to ultimately get us to the result that we want. Okay, let's see if I turned off the laser pointer and I'll move. Oh, perfect, it worked. And that brings us to the idea of generative AI. Creates new content, as we all know. We're all familiar with these platforms now. It applies both machine learning and deep learning techniques. These are not fully automated. There are human beings behind the scenes who help tweak these LLMs to make sure that they're not telling us things that we shouldn't see, hear, and not hallucinating too great an extent. We'll talk about hallucinations in a moment. But again, that chaos that we talked about in the deep learning process and the neural network process is built into the generative AI process. And you can try this out yourself, put the same prompt into a generative AI platform today and tomorrow, and you'll get different results. You will very rarely be able to replicate the same result across platforms, certainly, and in the same platform as well. Let's talk about some of the differences between the two. So data requirements. Deep learning, because it learns or is trained on its own, requires vastly more data, usually the machine learning, to get the right result. And generative AI, as well as any deep learning platform, is only good as the source data. So you may see this from the generative AI results that you get on search engines right now. It'll tell you something is true and give you a source for it, but it has no ability to assess the underlying truthfulness of the source. So it gives you a truthy answer that may not be a truthful answer in the first instance. Let's talk about output. Machine learning, deep learning, very much part of our lives now that used to kind of interpret, identify patterns, and Gen AI creates content, as we mentioned, and also hallucinates. This hallucination, if it's not clear by my comments thus far, is a feature and not a bug. It's part of the system. And we've got to keep that in mind as we think about appropriate use cases and think about governance for these platforms. And because Gen AI talks to us, we tend to think of it as human. It's just a part of who we are. It's how we interact with systems and things that appear human in the first instance. And again, that can be a dangerous thing. So another way to think of Gen AI, is it a stochastic parrot, fancy word for random? Is it a random simulation of a human being? There was a 2021 article by researcher Emily Bender that kind of coined this term of a stochastic parrot and kind of identified the problem as being the fact that there is no meaning, no underlying meaning in this picture that we're seeing. The computer doesn't know what a parrot is, doesn't know what a keyboard is. This is, my prompt was, give me an image of a stochastic parrot. All it knows is that for that prompt, a likely outcome is something that looks like this. And it doesn't even care what this looks like. It cares about the mathematical representation that creates an image that we think looks like a parrot. So this is a mathematical representation of a picture of a picture of a parrot. It only has meaning because we apply meaning to it in the first instance. Now, that's kind of hard to deal with in the first instance from a governance perspective, because the average user will think, well, hey, this machine knows what a parrot is, and it knows how to give me the output that it wants. It's actually giving us, or that I want, it's giving us the output that it's been trained to want in the first instance, and that can often be at odds with what we're asking for. In this regard, generative platforms often have pre-built prompts to deal with the questions that we're asking. Quite often, for example, in image generation, it will, if you look at the actual prompt that's being applied, it will ask for something that's cartoonish or something that's bright and colorful that you didn't put into your prompt. So not only are these things making us feel like they're human, like they understand, they're trying to figure out, in the first instance, what we actually want with our prompts. A lot of complexity in dealing with these platforms. Talking about complexity, you may have read about agentic AI. You may be applying it at your institution in some fashion. It's a fancy word for automation, built generally on generative platforms. Agentic AI is meant to automate certain processes. There's a Matthew McConaughey commercial where his AI agent makes the wrong restaurant reservation and has him sitting outside in the rain, where Woody Harrelson is sitting under a nice awning. Certainly, that's one use case. Other use cases are typical business use cases, anything from financial process automation to registration automation, et cetera. But the idea of automating a platform that is built on chaos, built on kind of a black box that we may or may not have complete visibility into, comes with its own complexities. It's kind of a legal and ethical gray zone. Who's responsible if you ask your agent to, for example, enroll early decision at a number of institutions? Agentic AI enrollment will become a thing. And what happens when the platform applies early decision for the student and the student doesn't want early decision in the first instance? Turn it around. What happens when a agentic AI platform is used to deny someone or to hire or interview someone in the first instance? Who's responsible for that? If it's meant for purchasing, who's responsible for the purchase if there's a mistake made on the platform? That's really unclear in the law and unclear from a regulatory standpoint. There's also the privacy concern. Agentic AI needs even more data. They need to know everything about the relevant situation. You may have heard the story about Microsoft AI PCs with their snapshot function, taking a snapshot of your screen every few seconds or so. So it knows each and everything you've done and each and every piece of data that you've processed. So it can learn about your processes and work better for you. Well, what is your agent looking at? And does the provider of that agent, here Microsoft, have the right rights to be looking at those things? All complex questions that need to be answered or at least asked in the first instance as we build governance structures. And then there's this, the ubiquitous glitter that's popping up, the sparkle that's popping up on all of the platforms that we use. We here, if you look in our Zoom instance, we do not have the AI assistant turned on, and that's purposeful. But you'd be surprised, or maybe not, about how often the little sparkle is popping up, whether or not you want it on the platform. It's a feature being built in primarily because the providers are looking for functionality, looking to build a market in relation to AI functionality with their software platforms. Stupid questions often help. Why is that there? Do we need it on? Do we want our meeting transcribed? What are we doing with those transcriptions? Are we retaining them appropriately? If there's a litigation hold, are we keeping them appropriately in the litigation hold? That sparkle can create more problems than it's worth in the first instance. And again, those stupid questions about, gosh, is this something I really want? Is this a feature that you built into my platform or a bug that I should be worried about? Those are important questions to ask. So that's our background. Let's kind of bring ourselves on campus and talk about complexity, some of these complexity questions that we've raised, and different stages of adoption. So I've got my little matrix there of low to high adoption and low to high complexity. And we'll start off with traditional automation. This is kind of everywhere. Machine learning, as I mentioned, is built into much of what we do. Apologies that the text is cut off on the side there. I obviously didn't use AI to place the text. Otherwise, it probably would have done it better than I did. Anyway, So much of what we do is automated. Much of what's automated in our platforms is built on machine learning or deep learning in some fashion. We've got platforms that help us with automated messaging and outreach. We've got scheduling widgets. We've got application processing platforms, student registration, asset management platforms that are all automated, and we're not going back. And that's it is very much a good thing. We've got a very good handle on how to deal with machine learning and deep learning, at least in relation to administrative and ministerial functions as a society. So that's really a baseline, and most of our institutions are doing this already. What comes next? Fancy word, robotic process automation. The term refers to robotic automation in the first instance because it's often found, say, on a assembly line or in manufacturing. When we talk about robotic process information, so automation on campus, we're generally talking about technological automation, things like revenue cycle management, records management, managing appointments, enrollment management, kind of those very baseline interacting platforms or interaction platforms where you're taking in information, analyzing it, and putting it in the right place. Something that a human used to do either on the phone or then via email, I guess originally in person. So there's also very high adoption of that. Also a good development, I think, saves us time and energy, lets us do more high quality human work or have high quality human work be done by human beings in the first instance. That brings us down to kind of more in-depth machine learning platforms, things like data entry, where we're telling platforms, oh, this is the type of data that I want you to pull from this form and put over there for me, move from one form to another, to identify in a PDF or otherwise pull out of one place and file it in another. Certainly things like managing physical plants. Machine learning is often used in relation to energy conservation and other things that we're doing to manage physical plants. Accounting and financial processes are very well tuned and set up for machine learning solutions. Things like grading support or things like following metrics across various semesters and timelines, also very apt for machine learning processes. Deep learning, kind of machine learning on steroids, where we have neural networks doing the work and ingesting larger sets of data. I've got some examples there, including campus security. We've got deep learning techniques that can be applied toward cameras to identify a weapon or a person of interest or a face of someone who should be excluded from campus. Our cybersecurity tools like CrowdStrike use deep learning to, for example, identify good behavior and bad behavior on our systems. All good, important issues and use cases for our campuses. And then we get into the generative AI world. Content creation for marketing, for outreach, for communications generally, virtual instructors, chatbots on our website, and then therapy helplines. A recent study came out kind of looking at younger users of AI, and one of the most prevalent uses of AI was for ersatz therapy, for talking through with someone, or at least with something online, problems that the student and the young person didn't want to discuss with a human being. That's really interesting. And to think about a generation that's more at ease talking about personal problems, personal issues with a machine than with a human being. It comes with benefits and risks, right? It's better, I guess, that someone talk about it. If you train the platform correctly, it can identify troublesome situations that need human intervention. But also that's something to get used to, that our students may be turning to technology in the first instance for therapy input from these platforms. So that's a little bit about how we're using AI on campus and the complexity that arises from that. We'll talk about strong AI and artificial general intelligence. I had to catch myself because I usually slip up and call the A alternative, a bit of a Freudian slip, like alternative intelligence. Of course, it's artificial intelligence. And what's strong AI in the first instance? All of the use cases we've been talking about up till now are generally referred to as weak AI, believe it or not. They are brittle models in the global sense. They can only work in a limited set of circumstances, and they don't have general application yet. AGI, or artificial general intelligence, is the concept of a machine that can be autonomous, task agnostic, and to exceed us by way of performance. And I want to talk about OpenAI's definition. Back in 2018, when they kicked off, well, not when they kicked off, but certainly when they were coming to market with a number of these platforms, they had a more detailed definition: highly autonomous systems that outperform humans at most valuable work. Well, that's changed, and now their idea and definition of AGI is systems that are generally smarter than humans. Again, these systems aren't smart; they do things better than we do. I think it's kind of dangerous in the first instance to start using language like learning or intelligence and being smart in relation to these systems, at least from a governance perspective. Okay, like with any tool, that's the background. And let's talk about kind of how we get into a good governance position. These are tools, and tools can be used for good or for ill. I've got some examples there. We've got ChatGPT, but for every good LLM, there's a bad LLM. Fraud GPT is a thing. It is an LLM built on some commercial platforms and some open source platforms without the guardrail. So you can ask Fraud GPT all the things that you can't ask ChatGPT. There are also LLM platforms, generative platforms that can be used for a host of different malicious activities. Let's talk about deepfakes. On the good side, we've got Ask Dali. That's one of my favorite generative platforms currently. It's from the Salvador Dali Museum down in St. Petersburg, Florida. There's a phone line you can call and you can speak to Salvador Dali. It's a little hokey in the first instance, but they do a good job at emulating his voice, and you can have a fun conversation now and then. The flip side of that, real-time video deepfakes. The technology exists right now to, in real time or with very little preparation, to create a very good deepfake of me or of your provost or of your president or of your CFO. To ask for a wire transfer, or of a user to ask for credential changes. For every good generative platform, there is a bad generative platform. And then we have tools, again, like CrowdStrike and others, endpoint detection and response, or extended detection and response. That's what XDR stands for. And for every good detection tool, there's a good evasion tool, phishing attacks, or other zero-day vulnerabilities that these platforms can find. With every good development in this field, we're going to have additional risk from the bad guys that's going to accompany that. How do we regulate any of this? What rules exist? And the answer are too many and not enough. We've got both ideas of what I like to refer to as hard law and soft law in this regard. Hard law is what you think it is. It's what lawyers go to school to study, and it's what they practice generally. It's applicable law, guidance, regulations, the things that actually apply to your institutions as a legal matter. We'll see some of those in a moment. Soft law is kind of everything else: societal expectations, stakeholder expectations, parent, student, employee expectations, general guidelines, voluntary standards. We'll talk about one of those that may be helpful in the governance arena. Okay, so we've got some of the hard laws that apply to AI. There is really only currently one generally applicable state law that applies to AI. There is no federal AI governance currently. The Colorado AI Act is recently, it was adopted recently and applies to institutions in Colorado, in some cases outside of Colorado, and focuses in the first instance on risk management, disclosure, and governance. All things that should be near and dear to your hearts as professionals at your institutions, things that you should be involved in already in your current domains. Certainly from a data governance and cybersecurity perspective, all of your institutions should be thinking about transparency, risk management, and governance. So the good news is we have a lot of the tools that these regulatory regimes are looking at. All of the other bullet points there under the U.S. law are sectoral, under the U.S. law heading, are sectoral laws that can apply to our adoption of AI. I've got the FTC Act, or Unfair, Deceptive, and Abusive Acts and Practices. That's what UDAP means. Every state also has its own Fair Business Practices Act. Those generally apply to for-profit institutions, but some of our institutions do things that are very close. We sell a lot of stuff. We sell a lot of merch for our institutions. We sell a lot in the bookstore and otherwise. And there can be use cases where our implementation of AI kind of gets close enough to the commercial realm to be of concern in relation to these acts. Also, on the state level, the Attorney General is the one who governs the Unfair, Deceptive, Abusive Acts and Practices Acts. And the Attorney General is also the one who governs nonprofits. So even non-for-profit institutions have to worry about this lens through which attorneys general view the world. And if they think that a certain usage of AI is unfair to consumers in the commercial space, they will certainly think that it's unfair to students, parents, donors, others in the educational and non-for-profit space. So those acts can inform the rules that we may have to adhere to. And a bunch of other alphabet soup in relation to laws that may apply. I want to bring up IP and intellectual property protection in the first instance. Certainly, we have to be aware of how we protect our IP and trade secrets when we deal with AI. We talked about the amount of data that AI needs to function. They want your data, they want to own your data. And if you're trying to protect a trade secret, putting that trade secret into a publicly available LLM is probably not a great idea. Around the world, there have been other hard laws that have been adopted. We've got the EU AI Act, which approaches things from a product liability standpoint. In the EU, from a personal data standpoint, there's the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation on the privacy front. The recently enacted EU Data Act deals with data platforms and IoT. So IoT can also, and IoT data can be implicated by our AI usage. And then in China, they've adopted guidelines which may be voluntary or may not, depending on how the Chinese government wants to implement them. So that's the hard law. Let's talk about the soft law. I'm going to throw out 10 high-level principles in relation to AI regulation. And spoiler alert, these came from ChatGPT. Oh, I used to have an attribution down on this slide, but it's no longer there. So I'll go back. And my only point in highlighting that I got these from ChatGPT is this. These platforms can give really good answers. And as long as there is an educated, informed human in the loop to verify the answers, it's okay to use the output. But don't use ChatGPT in the first instance to draft your final AI policy at your institution. It takes a lot more than just putting in a prompt to get to good governance. So some of these principles include fairness, accountability, transparency. We have to tell people what we do with their data, how AI is being used. We have to have our governance processes in writing. That's the accountability principle. And what we do has to be reasonably fair. We have to understand that using AI can put us on unequal footing with other stakeholders. So we have to ensure that our usage is fair. It's got to be safe and secure. That's a baseline for any technological tool we use. It has to ensure privacy in relation to personal data. Again, we talked about this human in the loop, and who the human is very important. And I'll talk about that in the first instance. Think about your finance function. If you have a human in the loop and that human happens to be a first-year intern in your finance group, it may be a wonderful person and they may work hard, but they may not have the insight necessary to determine whether a certain financial analysis from an AI platform is okay. And how do we develop that next generation of maturity and experience? That's an open question that probably should be built into your governance program. That humans in the loop need to have appropriate skill, experience, and accreditation where appropriate to play that role. It can't just be IT. It can't just be someone who's saying, yep, that's how we expected the model to work. We'll talk a little bit about that process of how to evaluate model outputs in a few slides. These platforms we use have to be robust and reliable. They have to do what we want them to do. They have to do the right thing. This is interesting, beneficence. You'll see this in a lot of discussions around AI platforms. We as individual organizations will not always think about how this affects the world more broadly. I think we need to as higher ed institutions. How AI affects our students is going to have an effect on future generations and our society as a whole. So we have to have an eye and make sure our use of AI aligns with our mission statement as an institution. Sustainability. The one dirty secret about all these little AI images that I create is they use a heck of a lot of energy, and it's probably a lot more wasteful than if I just typed in a few words to a slide. So I'm probably not doing the best job from a governance standpoint thinking about sustainability, but we all should. And then inclusion. Because these platforms will be used by a large number of people from a large number of backgrounds, we have to make sure that they can react and provide the appropriate benefits. And that little asterisk at the end went to the attribution to ChatGPT that has mysteriously disappeared from my slide. So we know some of these principles already. For those of us subject to GDPR who have looked into the privacy field at all, we've got some very similar principles in relation to data protection. What we have to do has to be lawful, transparent, is fair and fair. What we do, we have accountability for that. If it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. If our policies and procedures aren't properly documented, they're going to be impossible to demonstrate to others. We have to make sure that outputs are accurate. We have to make sure that we're only putting in the data that's needed. And we have to make sure that confidentiality and integrity, data integrity, is preserved where appropriate. So the good news is we know how to do some of these things already, and it's important at your institutions to leverage that experience as you go down this governance road. So I'll move ahead a little bit quickly to get to a bit more on the NIST AI risk management framework. But some of the problems in relation to regulations are, the number of rules that are out there, who's going to enforce against us, are regulators trying to get to the highest possible level of reasonable restriction, or are they trying to race to the bottom and throw the floodgates open? You may be aware of federal proposals to put a moratorium on state-level AI regulation. We'll see if that happens. That would certainly be a race to the bottom. And then bad actors. When bad things happen in relation to AI, we're going to get bad law, and that will create challenges as we go down the road. So admitting there's a problem, that's the first step to governance. Admitting that we don't know where to start and that we're already adopting AI at a rampant pace at our organizations without governance. That's really the problem that we need to solve. Even if the legislators pause regulation, we need to move forward. We can't, as a risk management matter, just adopt AI blindly without thinking about how to build that into our broader governance structure. And realizing that we all have a role to play, whether or not we're a CIO or a CISO, a CFO has a role to play. Senior leadership at the institution has a role to play. Students have a role to play, and we'll talk about how to get input from affected stakeholders in a moment. So I mentioned this AI risk management framework, and the one piece of homework that I'll give all of you is if you're not familiar with the framework, you should look it up online and take some time to look through it if you're involved in AI implementation at all. It provides a nice structure, a 4-point structure to build a governance program. It talks about building a culture of risk management. That's the govern function there at the center. And then 3 other functions: mapping, measuring, and managing in relation to your AI usage. And that's where I wanted to spend the rest of our talk today, talking about each of these functions and how you can use them to build an appropriate risk management framework and governance framework for your adoption of AI. So again, the framework is built around these 4 functions. It's in a circle because these things all happen kind of at the same time. The NIST framework, being a federal framework, says, hey, start with the govern function. Build a governance framework before you do anything else. But when's the last time that happened at your institution in relation to technology? We adopt technology and then we build governance on top of it. It happens at all of our organizations. I think we should start with the map function, and that's where my focus will go now. What does the map function mean? The map function means that you're looking at AI adoption. You're looking at where you want to be in relation to AI, so current and future state. You're looking at risks. You're looking at risk tolerance to set the baseline of where you are and what level of risk you're willing to take in relation to AI adoption. And context is key. You've got to balance the purpose behind the AI adoption, its use, the rules that apply, the various settings in which you'll be using AI, and wrap it up in your organizational, your institutional mission to build that context in the first instance. The map function is not just a technological function. You need to have interdisciplinary actors take part to give a diverse set of inputs into the context that you're creating. You need to determine your risk tolerance, and that's something that many organizations and institutions haven't spent enough time doing. Hey, that sparkle's really nice. Let's turn it on in Zoom. Well, what's our risk tolerance in relation to that? What's the risk if, for example, a highly sensitive discussion is leaked and not secured properly? You need to start with the risk tolerance, and that's set in the map phase. And then also system requirements. Do we have what we need to appropriately implement and monitor these systems? That's an important question when we're dealing with AI. Then we take all of those findings, we categorize them. We talk about tasks and methods. We look at the limits of our knowledge. And this is a cycle. What we know in the first time we go through the map function is not going to be the same thing when we do it again. And all of these functions need to be repeated periodically. We need to determine our willingness and ability to have human oversight over what we're doing. And we talked about having the right human in the loop already. And then we've got to talk about integrity of systems and the TEV cycle, T-E-V-V, test, evaluate, validate, and verify. Testing is what it sounds like, testing out a system to see how it works, evaluating the output, validating, and verifying. And the difference between the two V's in the TEVV process is validation is determining whether the correct product or output is to determine, pardon me, whether the system worked properly in creating the output, how it functioned in the first instance. Did all of the wheels and gears turn in the right way? Were the weights applied appropriately the way we expected to get to the output? And then the verification step, the last V, is whether that product, whether that output is the thing we wanted. We put the input in, it worked. Did it work correctly? That's the validation phase. Did it give us the thing we wanted? That's the verification phase. So figuring out who's going to be responsible for what, that's key in the map function. And that's that next bullet point I have there, understanding the capabilities of your team, the usage to which you're going to put these platforms, goals, benefits, and costs. That all goes into, those are all factors that go into your TEVV process. Lastly, the map takes all of these inputs and then identifies risks. In the NIST AI risk management framework, they focus primarily on legal and regulatory risks, again, because it's a federal framework. I'd encourage you to think about organizational and reputational risks as well, because those are things you think about on a daily basis in your institutions, and you need to use that good knowledge and use those good structures, those risk management and identification structures you have in this process. You identify the controls that you're able to apply to them. Can you control all risks? Do you have appropriate insurance in place in case your usage of AI goes off the rails or results in unanticipated outputs, for example? And you look at those impacts, positive and negative, and then lastly, evaluate a process for getting feedback. Because this isn't a one and done process. You map where you are currently and where you want to be and all of these risk considerations. And then you figure out, well, how the heck are we going to figure out if our expectations from the map function remain true? And that's through feedback and the measure function. The measuring function is exactly that, measuring what's going on, looking at what and how your systems work, evaluating the trustworthiness of your platforms. And here again, that TEVV process comes in. Are humans protected in your usage of AI? Are negative outcomes occurring that are affecting human stakeholders? Performance is measured. Remember that Plinko image that I showed you? Are the outputs that you're getting the most efficient outputs? Are they reliable? Are you getting the outputs you need? When I waste my time and create these AI images for my presentations, I sometimes go through 2 or 3 or 4 iterations before I get the image that I want. That can be a balance of both the platform that I'm using, the prompts that I'm using, and the prompt transformation that happens in the generative platforms, how it looks at, interprets, and adds to my prompts. So performance is key. It's not just about getting the right output. It's about how that output's created in relation to how robust and reliable your platform is. Looking and monitoring functionality and behavior is important. Behavior of both human users and the systems that we're implementing. And we need to do all of this, unfortunately, before implementation. Well, I've got that underlined here just to note that the rule is being proven by the exception here. Very few of our organizations are going to go through all of this before we implement a system. If you build a governance platform around the AI risk management framework, be aware of this and create an appropriate exception for when you're going to start the measurement function. If you say you follow NIST AI RMF and don't go through all of this before implementation, you're not following NIST AI RMF. And as a litigator, I can tell you the only thing worse than not having a plan and not having a policy in relation to something is having a policy or plan and not following it in the first instance. So that is certainly an operational shortfall or maybe risk in the RMF in the first instance, and something you should all be aware of. And it's very difficult in the measurement phase to generalize, to say, well, that system is functioning well on a whole, as a whole, or not. The devil is in the details, and the details we get through appropriate user and other stakeholder input. And this continues down the line of under the heading of evaluating trustworthiness. We're looking at safety risks in the first instance. We're talking about safety in relation to AI platforms. And what do we mean by safety? We've got to think again about how reliant humans are on these platforms, about automation bias. Humans is assuming just because something comes from a computer that it's reliable and true and correct in the first instance. We have to our governance programs have to not only protect us from AI, they have to protect us from ourselves in our usage of AI, because again, it's a tool, and all tools come with risks, and all tools come with safety risks in the first instance. And again, that safety has to be determined before deployment. Here's the good news about some of the regulatory regimes that are out there. I mentioned the EU AI Act is taking a product liability approach to AI regulation. You'll start to see that little CE emblem from the EU. Turn over your mouse or turn over really anything electronic on your desk, and you may see a CE on it. That's a stamp from the EU. It says that that a piece of equipment is in conformity with the European product liability standards. The EU AI Act is going to require that on high-risk AI systems, including educational systems. So here's a tip. If you're dealing with vendors in this regard, ask them their plan about the EU AI Act conformance, about conforming with the EU AI Act, and ask them when they're going to get the CE symbol on their platform. If they tell you, well, you're in a US institution and we don't have to do that for you, you probably should look for another AI provider. So that's one way to deal with safety, relying on vendors in the first instance, trusting but verifying that vendors are doing their due diligence in that regard. Transparency is also key, making sure that you're giving appropriate disclosures to people on both how to use the platforms and when these platforms are being used. Think about that chat bot on your website, your institution website. Do you have a little human being picture on that website? That may be illegal in California. They've got a law that regulates making it appear that chatbots are human beings. But it may also be unfair to make a person think that they are dealing with a human being. The first thing I do when I'm testing out a chatbot for a client or a potential client is I go into the chatbot and I ask, are you a human or a bot? If it can't answer, I know it's a bot, and I know that there's potentially a problem there. I always feel bad when it's a human being, actually, and they start to speak with me. I feel bad for kind of wasting their time. But it's making that transparent disclosure on the front end can be important in how you're using these platforms. Documenting privacy risk, looking at environmental impact, looking at your TEVV process, and documenting its effectiveness is key. Looking at risks over time. And getting feedback about measurement, feedback from users, from faculty, from parents if they're impacted, from, for example, prospective students, if you have gotten any complaints about the AI processes that you're using. That multi-domain input is key, both internally and externally, to give you robust measurement in in figuring out how your AI platforms are working. Then you take the map function, the measurement function, and you end up in the management function. You're prioritizing risks. You're trying to maximize benefits and minimize negative impacts. If you do any risk management at your organization, this should all be familiar. Risk assessment is never one and done. You should do it periodically, annually, more frequently. Good news is that's up to you. The bad news is very rarely do organizations and institutions decide on a cadence for doing something like risk management when they're not required to by law. So really best practice in keeping the process going in relation to the AI risk management framework is setting up a cadence for engaging in risk management periodically. So that brings us to the governance function. And based on everything that we've gone through thus far, we need policies and procedures in place to make sure that all of this happens according to plan. We've got to think about things like end of life. We've got lots of providers out there, and many of them are going to fail or consolidate. What happens when we want to offboard an AI platform? How can we get that data back? How can we transition users appropriately to the new platform? Thinking about communication among the governance teams, how to train appropriate people, get the right human in the loop, and that executive leadership and senior leadership takes responsibility for making risk decisions. That's all key to the governance function. And then 2 more slides here on governance. Thinking about diversity of inputs, again, is key, and thinking about diversity of folks who are on that governance committee in relation to AI. This may become taboo in our present situation, certainly, but your inputs are your outputs in AI governance are only as good as your inputs, and diverse inputs will lead to robust and diverse outputs in the first instance. And then thinking about safety first, thinking about all of these issues, design, development, deployment, and uses of AI, having folks ask the question, not just, is this cool, or can this make my life easier, but is it safe? That's the important question to ask before any AI project kicks off in the first instance. And then lastly, you need feedback in the governance function from relevant actors. Just because you have policies in place doesn't mean that they shouldn't change. In fact, they should likely change over time, especially as our platforms change and as our third parties change. Every one of those third parties, just like CrowdStrike in the first slide, is a risk to us. And we need to be able to plan for incidents in relation to first party and third party risks arising from our AI usage. So just 2 more slides here. The simple maxim to think about in relation to AI governance: don't be creepy. Try and avoid that uncanny valley, that flip from affinity to revulsion. In the end, public perception and student perception of what's fair and ethical comes down to what's familiar, but not artificially so. That cloying voice on Copilot, it's a silly little example, but it is an example of how maybe you don't need to replace everything that's human with something that's AI. And having a human in the loop, having a responsible human in the loop who can override decisions and take appropriate action when AI goes off the rails, and it will go off the rails, is going to help you avoid the whipsaw effect of people turning on you and stakeholders being disappointed in relation to your AI adoption. And last slide here, think about unanticipated consequences, how you're interconnected both internally to different stakeholders and externally. Our individual impacts will be small, but they can metastasize, they can grow. One student who has a bad experience with a therapy bot may soon be 10 or 100 or 1,000 students at your organization. So thinking about that safety first mindset, externalities first, how is this going to potentially create harm, is an important skill to have and helps you assess risk on a periodic basis. So the only question is whether the recording will be available. Oh, Josh answered that. Yes, the recording will be available. Any other questions in the minute or so we have left?
Well, it doesn't look like there are any questions, so thank you to everyone who joined us this morning. As a reminder, once you leave the webinar, you'll be prompted to complete a survey about today's event. It will just take you a couple minutes, and we'd love your feedback. Thank you all so much for attending. Thank you to Paul for presenting, and keep an eye out for more webinars in this series in the future. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.